My name is Tara. I'll never forget the day my life took an unexpected turn, a day that changed everything I thought I knew about my family. It was a Thursday morning when my husband, Ethan, called me at 9:47 a.m. His voice was unlike anything I'd heard in our 10-year marriage. It was a mix of shock and unease, the voice of a man who'd just had the ground beneath him shaken. "Tara," he said, "my mother got something in the mail." I told him I knew. There was a long silence on the other end. Then he asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" I replied, "Ethan, your whole family raised their hands to ban me from family events while our son, Leo, sat in the hallway and listened. I don't owe anyone a warning." He had no answer. Let me take you back to how it all started. I married into a well-to-do family. Ethan's mother, Mrs. Harper, was a woman of high society, used to getting her way. She was controlling and had very specific ideas about how a daughter-in-law should behave. Ethan, on the other hand, was a kind-hearted man, but he'd spent his whole life trying to keep his mother happy, often at the expense of our family. I worked full-time as a graphic designer, and I took care of Leo almost single-handedly because Ethan traveled for business 4 weeks out of every month. Despite my busy schedule, I always tried to be a good daughter-in-law. When Mrs. Harper had a hip replacement, I cooked for her, drove her to her physical therapy appointments, and even planned her 65th birthday party. I booked a fancy venue, designed the invitations myself, and ordered a custom-made cake from a renowned bakery an hour away. But it was never enough for her. The tension between us had been building for years over trivial things. She didn't like how I dressed Leo for family gatherings. She thought I was too opinionated when I spoke at dinner. Once, in front of everyone, she told Ethan that I lacked the grace a woman in our family should have. What she really meant was that I didn't bow down to her wishes. I refused to change who I was to fit her mold of the perfect daughter-in-law, and she never forgave me for that. One Tuesday evening in December, I was in for a rude awakening. Mrs. Harper gathered the entire family in her living room. There were her 2 daughters, their husbands, my brother-in-law Jake and his wife, 2 uncles, and Ethan. I was in the kitchen, preparing a tray of coffee cups as I'd been asked, when I heard her say, "Should Tara be banned from family events?" Her voice was cold and calculated, as if she'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. It was as if I was a problem to be solved, not a woman who'd spent a decade loving her son and raising their grandchild. I stood there, frozen, the tray trembling in my hands. Then, one by one, every single person in that room raised their hand. I don't know how I managed not to drop the tray. I quietly placed it on the side table in the hallway and walked back to the kitchen. I turned on the faucet so no one could hear me sobbing. My heart felt like it was being crushed. 10 years of holidays, birthdays, and family outings, and they all turned on me without a second thought. But what truly broke me was when Leo came into the kitchen about 20 minutes later. He was 9 years old, with Ethan's blue eyes and my determination. He could tell something was wrong just by looking at my face. He tugged on my sleeve and said, "Mom, why are they doing this?" His voice cracked, and I knew he'd heard everything. I knelt down on the kitchen floor and held him tight. I didn't cry in front of him. I saved that for later, when he was sound asleep. But in that moment, hugging my son while the laughter from the living room drifted in, something inside me shifted. I made a decision. 3 weeks before that fateful evening, I'd visited a family attorney, Ms. Reed. Ethan and I had been quietly discussing separation for months, and I wanted to know my rights. Ms. Reed was a sharp and no-nonsense woman. She started gathering financial records, property assessments, and a record of the informal loan of $45,000 that Mrs. Harper had given us 5 years ago. She'd always used that money as a way to control me, but it was never documented. That night, sitting on the kitchen floor with Leo in my arms, I texted Miss Reed one simple sentence: move forward. I didn't confront them that night. I bathed Leo, read him a story, and put him to bed. I let them think they'd won. But the next week, they received a letter from Miss Reed's law firm. The letter addressed the informal loan, proposing a clear repayment structure and turning it into a formal, legally binding agreement. It also outlined the division of marital assets in case of a separation, including the equity in our home, Ethan's retirement accounts, and a business partnership he'd entered into 3 years ago. And most importantly, it included a formal notice regarding defamation. The family meeting where I was voted out could be seen as coordinated harm to my reputation. Mrs. Harper called me that afternoon. It was the first time she'd called me directly in over 2 years. Her voice was cautious, a tone I'd never heard from her before. She said she hoped it was all a misunderstanding. I listened patiently and then calmly told her there was no misunderstanding. I'd heard her question, seen every hand go up, and Leo had been heartbroken. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and I had the most honest conversation we'd had in years. We talked about Leo, our hopes, and our fears. He wasn't a bad person, he'd just been trapped in his mother's web for too long. He cried as he realized the cost of his actions. We didn't reconcile immediately, but it was a start. After the letter, the family's behavior changed. Aunt Mildred, who'd been the most vocal against me, sent me a text saying she hoped we could move on. Ethan's sister, Sarah, who'd organized the seating for that cruel meeting, started showing interest in Leo's school activities and sent him gifts. I didn't respond with anger. I didn't need to. I'd stopped caring about their approval. One evening, about a month later, Leo asked me if we were still going to Grandma's for Christmas. I told him gently that things were changing, but wherever we spent the holidays, I'd make sure he felt loved and safe. He thought for a moment and then said, "Good. I didn't like how they made you feel, Mom. My life hasn't been easy since that letter. There have been tough legal battles, long nights of self-doubt, and difficult conversations. But I've never once regretted sending that text to Miss Reed. I've learned that silence isn't weakness, and patience isn't surrender. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying to explain yourself to those who will never understand and let your actions speak for themselves." They thought they could vote me out, but what they didn't realize was that I'd already decided to leave their toxic world behind.